I think we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone, all four of you that appear to be watching right now. Welcome to this live Facebook Live encounter with one of our Migratory Raptor ambassadors. So to start us off, my name is Anna. I'm the lead environmental educator at the Vermont Institute of Natural Science, also known as VINS. And we do quite a variety of different types of education, research, and rehabilitation work here. The education part of our mission is what we do to basically spread the idea that people can take part in conservation, and we inspire people to care about the natural world that is around them through teaching them about our wild friends and neighbors. We have a variety of different programs on site at our nature center, as well as outreaches to local schools and libraries, and we've branched out recently in the last 6 months into doing a lot of virtual encounters for schools and libraries, and also these live streaming events that are open to the public. So we're very glad that you got to join us today for this. Excuse me. Another part of what we do is our research, and that generally takes the form of citizen science research, but we're also developing a lot of different projects around raptor biology. If you know VINS, you know that we focus a lot on our raptors, or our birds of prey. Those are the majority of our wildlife ambassadors that help us with the education part of things. And so we take part in hawk watches on top of, most recently this season, Mount Ascutney down in Windsor. We also monitor the nest boxes in our meadow that are generally full of eastern bluebirds and tree swallows, and report the information gathered from both of these sources to scientists that are using this data to get us a better picture of the distribution of breeding and migratory raptors all over the country. Now, the rehabilitation part of our mission is probably what we're most known for in the local community. Our Avian Wildlife Rehabilitation Hospital sees around 400 patients a year in a normal year. But as we know, 2020 is by no means a normal year, and we're on track to see patient number 900 for the year 2020 within the next couple of weeks. Our Wild Bird Hospital has the goal of returning birds to the wild as soon as they're healed and able to go. So this involves caring for a broken wing, for example, or a head trauma that might have damaged an eye. Birds that get hit by cars or caught by cats or fly into the side of a building routinely come in for care and are able to be released when they're healthy. It's not always the case, though, that they heal fully from those injuries. And a certain number of birds that survive those injuries are unable to live wild lives any longer. So we give them what we call a career change, and they come to live here with us as ambassadors for their species. So in this program today, we're going to meet at least one, possibly two, of our raptor ambassadors. So permanent residents that live here with us at VINS because they sustain injuries in the wild that prevent them from flying. And as such, they prevent them from migrating, performing that amazing feat of endurance and navigation that many species of birds accomplish starting at this time of year and wrapping around again in the spring when they return north. So many of you might be familiar with the concept of migration, but let's just define it for a moment so we're all on the same page. Migration is a seasonal movement of a group of animals from one part of the world to another, and it could be very, very short distance. It could be a migration of 20 or 100 miles, but in many cases, many species of animals are long-distance migrants. So they move from one territory that they've spent the summer in to another territory that they'll spend the winter in, which is separated at a distance of sometimes 4,000 or 8,000 miles. Now, the seasonal movement of birds and other animals back and forth between these two environments has a lot of implications for conservation and ecology. Number one, we know that many of these species move seasonally, not just because of the colder temperatures that they experience in the winter in the northern hemisphere, but also because of the food that they need. These birds that we're going to meet today, many of them find that their food sources are not available to them in the wintertime, the same as in the summer. So we'll discuss a little bit about what each bird needs to do to survive in their environment and how that leads them to kind of the logical decision to be migratory. So if you'll give me just 30 seconds, I will go and get our very first ambassador bird. Wonderful. So this little guy is one of our animal ambassadors here at VINS, and he is also an excellent illustration of a raptor that is a long-distance trans-equatorial migrant. So this is Northfield right here. Northfield came originally from Northfield, Vermont, which is a town maybe about 45 minutes north of us here at VINS, and he is a broad-winged hawk. Now, broad-winged hawks as a species are very, very common hawks in New England. In fact, their population, by the numbers, they're probably the most populous hawk in our forests, but they tend not to be as conspicuous or as often seen as their slightly larger cousins, the red-tailed hawks. Broad-winged hawks, rather than having a red tail, have broad wings and a rather short, thick striped tail. You can sort of see those black and white stripes going down his tail. They're very thick, and if he were soaring overhead with that tail nice and flared out so that you could see it, you could count maybe 3 or 4 of those stripes. This is different from, let's say, a young red-tailed hawk or something like a Cooper's hawk, who have more like 5 to 7 stripes that you could count on their tails. So that's an easy way to distinguish broad-winged hawks from other members of the hawk family. Now, another way that I personally am able to instantly know that I'm looking up at a broad-winged hawk that's soaring overhead is by the sounds that they make. Many of us might be familiar with that classic screeching noise that Hollywood pretends that bald eagles make. If you hear that loud kind of kia in a movie, you're listening to the sound of a red-tailed hawk's scream. They're very majestic sounding, and bald eagles sound a little bit more like chickens laughing, so they have understandably substituted the two. Broad-winged hawks, being a diminutive relative of the red-tailed hawk, sound like a red-tailed hawk, but pitched up like 3 or 4 octaves. They scream on the edge of your hearing, a very, very high-pitched, sustained yell, essentially. And that, to me, is always a sign of spring here in Vermont, because our broad-winged hawks are returning from their migration. Now, a broad-winged hawk is a complete migrant. The term refers to the fact that all members of their species migrate. Red-tailed hawks, by comparison, are a partial migrant. So some red-tailed hawks actually stay in our area and don't migrate for the winter, but some of them do. Partially, they migrate. Complete migrants all up and leave. And where they're heading are places in northern South America, Central America, and Mexico. They'll head about as far south as Colombia, right on the border with Colombia and Brazil, for example, into places that are not necessarily tropical, but more temperate than what they're used to, just on another hemisphere, on the other half of the planet. And they're doing so because they need to follow their food source. If you can see how really small Northfield is, he's nowhere near the size of a red-tailed hawk, which could weigh 3 to 3.5 pounds. He instead weighs a mere, but healthy, 3/4 of a pound. So he is hunting much smaller prey items than a red-tailed hawk is, many of which are not really accessible in the winter. Things like the very smallest rodents, small migratory songbirds, snakes, lizards, frogs, salamanders, and large insects like dragonflies, caterpillars, grasshoppers, and the like. I always say, I don't know about you, but I don't see too many dragonflies in Vermont in January, and so this necessitates the broad-winged hawks moving to follow their food. When they head south, they are very energy efficient in the paths that they take. Being broad-winged birds, they can catch a lot of air under that tremendous surface area that they have. And so they take advantage of rising hot air columns like thermals that come off the land as the sun heats it differentially throughout the day. Broadwings can use this thermal like an elevator to get them up into the sky and a lot of elevation without actually having to flap their wings. The air just sort of carries them up there. They also use mountain updrafts, particularly in this part of the world along the Appalachian mountain range. The Appalachians run north to south, and the winds, the predominant weather patterns here, blow from west to east. So as the winds meet that long range of mountains, they have to go up and over. And in those updrafts on the west side of the mountains, we see a lot of migratory birds using those updrafts, again, to climb and to sustain altitude without having to expend a lot of energy by flapping their wings quite a bit. So following the Appalachian mountain range, you essentially get a kind of a highway. I just liken it to if you are taking a road trip, for example, you're going to follow the highways. You don't simply back out of your driveway and then go out across your neighbor's lawn, over a hill and through the woods. That won't be very efficient. No, you find a well-traveled path that is nice and smooth and efficient for your car to travel on. That's what broadwings do. They follow the highways or the wind patterns that give them the most energy efficient route. So being that, all of these broadwing hawks move, and they move on the same paths. You get tremendous concentrations of these birds during the migration season at certain points. And this was one of the citizen science projects I was referring to earlier of a hawk watch site. This affords scientists a really great opportunity to study the migration of hawks, particularly broadwings, by climbing up to certain peaks along their travel highway and counting the birds as they go by overhead, figuring out what types of weather really push them to move. It turns out that a wind coming out of the north is a really, really good day for broadwings to fly because they've got a little tailwind pushing them forward as well. They can travel a lot faster. We also can know more about essentially where they stop over. Where are these birds touching down to rest overnight to gain some food? Because they do not travel 4,000 miles in one go. That would be truly amazing. And there are some birds that do that, some raptors even. But broadwing hawks do not. They have to sit down and rest overnight, refuel essentially, and move on. Many of these hawk count sites here in Vermont, we have our Scottney site, but also Killington does some counts of migratory hawks. Putney has a very, very large count site, as well as Packmanadnock in southern New Hampshire. As you travel farther south, more broadwing hawks have joined into this kind of funnel of broadwing traffic. Places like Hawk Mountain Sanctuary in Pennsylvania, which has been doing a hawk migration count since 1932. They routinely count upwards of 10,000 broadwing hawks migrating over their site in a season. The season is roughly from the beginning of September to mid-October that you see these birds moving, and the highest concentration of them is almost just a 2-week span near the end of September. If you travel even farther south, let's say you go to Corpus Christi in Texas, that's right on the Gulf of Mexico. That is another site right along that broadwing hawk highway where they can count hundreds of thousands of broadwing hawks migrating over in a season. In Veracruz in Mexico, the scientists there count 1 million broadwing hawks passing over their site, because by that time pretty much every member of the population has gathered together and are headed fully south for the winter. Now that begs the question that's always been on my mind, and I wonder if it is on yours as well, which is, why do these birds come back? If it's getting really cold and their food source is disappearing, and they head south to the temperate forests for the winter where there's really abundant food, why would they ever decide to come back north? Which is really pretty interesting to think about, right? If I had the chance to go to Costa Rica, you would have a hard time tearing me back to Vermont, especially in March when they come back. And scientists are still investigating this question. There's a lot of recent data that suggests that their nest sites are the most important driving factor, that nesting in South America is a little bit more difficult for these birds. There's more predation, and they have to worry about competing with other bird residents for nest sites. So they come back north to nest safely. Another piece of data might be that they experience more disease in South America, and that they just don't have an immune system that can tolerate the diseases that happen to occur in tropical regions. So they come north to avoid that. It's still under investigation in migratory science. The science of studying bird migration is new and burgeoning, and there's much to be learned about these really magnificent athletes of birds. So I hope, and I wonder if you guys have any questions right now, Perhaps I can answer some of these questions, or perhaps I could direct you to some other resources to continue our investigations. I know I've got some questions here. I've got a lovely partner writing the questions down for me. What food do they eat in the tropics? Ooh, that's a very, very good question. They eat a lot of similar things to what they eat up here in the spring. So reptiles might not be the same species that we have, but we have a lot of garter snakes that broadwings eat. Down in the tropics, it might be a lot of tree snakes and small lizard species that are way more abundant down there. So they have a similar diet in both places, but it's not entirely the same because we have different species than they do in the tropics. Yeah. What do you do with the captive birds in the winter? Very good question, especially about the broadwing hawks, given that they are complete migrants. We actually are 3 broadwing hawks that are out on exhibit, that are exposed to the elements all year long. We do bring them inside in the first week of November into a heated space. So they get to remain in a space that's heated to 50 degrees throughout the winter, and then we put them back outside in early April. So essentially they migrate to a new, warmer enclosure. Northfield here is a lucky boy that gets to live in that heated space all year round. But he too comes out on a glove. We take him for walks, so he gets plenty of exposure to the wind and the sunlight and the weather when the temperatures are appropriate for him to do that. Awesome. I love it. Any other questions coming in? I will say that our broadwings are really our only complete migrants in Vermont. We do have some peregrine falcons on exhibit, American kestrels, turkey vultures. We currently have a black vulture on exhibit, and they tend to be partial migrants in certain parts of the world. So we provide those birds with supplemental heat. Rather than taking them off exhibit out of their enclosures for the winter, we provide them with radiant heat bulbs that they can choose to stand near to warm up a little bit. And that is, good for them down to about 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And then if it gets below 0, we routinely spend just a couple of days below 0 here in Vermont. We bring those birds indoors as well to make sure that they're staying safe in the warmer temperatures. Awesome, yeah. So that's a little bit about our broadwing hawk. I'm going to sneak him back in his crate, and I will get out our second migratory bird and talk about her for a little while. But please keep commenting with your questions. I really love that. So I'll be right back. So here's our next guest. Whew. Even though we're indoors right now, she's feeling a little, she can hear the wind outside. Wonderful. So this is Bridport. Bridport is also a Vermonter. She's originally from Bridport, Vermont. It's a town up on the east side of Lake Champlain. And she is a rough-legged hawk. Now, rough-legged hawks are another complete migrant, but they do things really, really differently than the broadwing hawks do. I typically describe it as in an opposite way, but they're traveling in the same direction. This is a migratory bird that lives in the north and flies to the south for the winter and returns to the north in the spring. But it so happens that we are where they go in the winter. We are the south for a rough-legged hawk, which means, if you're thinking about it, that this is a bird native to the Arctic tundra. This is a bird that lives in northern Canada, northern Scandinavia, and northern Russia typically, so they're highly adapted to cooler or cold weather. She's called a rough-legged hawk, as you might be able to see. She's got feathered legs. Look at those beautiful honey-colored and brown splotched legs. She's showing those off right now. Those feathery legs that she has help keep her warm. They're essentially like wearing insulated snow pants year-round. She's also got rather tiny feet. I don't know if you guys were paying attention to the size of our broadwing hawk's feet, but our rough-legged hawk here, Bridport, she weighs twice if not 3 times as much as the broad-winged hawk, yet her feet are really not that much bigger. She has sort of stubby, compact toes that allow her to avoid getting frostbite. Oh, she's gotta go. There is such a thing as migratory restlessness. While we're talking about migration, it's worth talking about the behaviors that precede migration in these birds. As you might imagine, there are signals in the environment, like daylight, like temperature, like the availability of their prey resources, that tell them it might be time to start thinking about moving south soon. A German scientist named this behavior series Zugenruhe, or migratory restlessness, and many of our migratory birds experience it. They get a little bit antsy and dancy during migration season because they feel the pull of the need to travel south. Neither Bridport nor Northfield are doing any southward traveling. Unfortunately, they both have wing injuries, which is why they're here with us at Binns. But being a cold weather bird, between her feathery legs, short stubby toes that prevent her from getting frostbite, this is a bird that is right at home in the coldest weather and temperatures. So she's a bird that, honestly, if we could, we would bring her in the summertime to an air-conditioned place so that she's not exposed to 80 or 90 degree weather, which is very taxing for her. As taxing as it would be for the broadwing to be in the cold, it's difficult for her to be in the extreme heat. Now, rough-legged hawks living up in the tundra migrate south to us, and their primary prey source that they're following are small rodents, things like mice. Oh, honey. Goodness gracious. Well, we can go back home soon. They eat a lot of lemmings, mice, voles, moles, other rodents, and the like. And lemmings in the Arctic are plentiful for most years in the summertime, but they become harder and harder to find and hunt as the snowpack piles up in the tundra. So these birds travel south to areas of the world where the snow is not uniformly deep and dense, where these rodents may be a little bit more active in our sort of warmer, more mild winters, certainly more mild than in northern Canada, and they can find a little bit more accessible food for themselves. So we see rough-legged hawks from approximately October, November through February or March, and the best places to see them are places in Vermont that look like the tundra, that are big, wide open spaces. Bridport is a town in Addison County, which is a flat, wide open agricultural area. There's not a whole ton of trees in many places in Addison County. Instead, there's big, flat, wide open farm fields, which resemble the flat, wide open tundra landscape that she's used to living in her Arctic homeland. And so that affords her the familiarity and ability to use her same hunting styles that she normally does use. There's a grouse. You had to shake down all of her feathers, apparently. All right, so that's a little bit about our rough-legged hawk. I see another question we had was, do red-tailed hawks migrate? And the answer to that is yes. Red-tailed hawks do migrate, though not all of them do it. And they do it in a kind of interesting way. Many raptors are leapfrog migrants, where the northernmost living of the species, the members of the species that live at the highest latitudes, actually travel the farthest south. And members of the species that live in mid-latitudes travel just a little far. So, for example, we here in Vermont probably have pretty northern red-tailed hawks, and those of our red-tailed hawks that migrate south for the winter, they might go to Texas. But the red-tailed hawks that live in Virginia, maybe they just go to North Carolina. They don't move very far. Are there any other questions that are coming along? Oh, that's so lovely. Congratulations, Patrice. Happy anniversary. Belated anniversary. We will say hi to all the raptors for you. This is wonderful. One more thing I will show you before we go, potentially, and I may bring out Northfield again just for some last questions, if there are any, is when Bridport gets really, really focused on something. If I move my glove around, you'll notice that her head stays perfectly locked in space. And this is an adaptation that many birds have that allow them to focus on their prey items. So when she is sitting in the top of a tree or hovering on a really, really windy day up in the tundra, she might get seasick if she tries to stay put in that wind, unless she can really lock her gaze on whatever it is that she's looking for. So she has this tremendous ability to be kind of a reversed bobblehead, as it were. Given that she's a little bit antsy, I'm going to put her back in her crate for now, but I would love to come back and answer the last few questions I see coming through. So I'll be right back. What do we got? Do any raptors change color for the migration? Oh, such an interesting question. I feel like this comes up a lot, and it probably is a false association between, say, snowshoe hares or short-tailed weasels and birds, because snowshoe hares go through several different coat colors in a year. They shed fur and grow in different colored fur to help blend in with the environment. Raptors almost universally only molt their feathers once per year, and they do it in the summer. And they don't change color for the most part. Some of them do change color, and the color change is more a marker of age. A great example is snowy owl. Snowy owl, both the males and the females are born white with a lot of black spots on them. And the females, as they molt every summer, they get rid of their old feathers, they grow in a new set of feathers, they stay the same color all the time, white with black splotches all over. The males get a little bit whiter every year, so they lose some of those black splotches. That's not a sign of winter versus summer, it's a sign of age, in males only. Very interesting stuff. All right, what do we got? You still have the turkey vulture, we do. I imagine that you're referring to Ogden, who is the second oldest vulture in captivity, probably the oldest female vulture in captivity. She has been confirmed to be female for the past couple of years after laying an egg, surprise. At the advanced age of 38, she laid her very first egg, so she is still with us. She's in retirement, she doesn't do education programs anymore, and she's living the life of luxury, really. Awesome. Do rough-legged hawks use thermals to soar as well? They do. They absolutely do. They have a much longer wing for their body size than a lot of the other soaring hawks, though. So they're capable of a bit more maneuverability and hovering than, say, a red-tailed hawk or a broadwing hawk is. And so they probably don't use thermals to the same degree, but they can use thermals, absolutely. Do any of our permanent residents breed at Vins? Another really good question. They do produce eggs on occasion. Most of the time those eggs are infertile. Even the birds that we have a male and a female together, they may lay an infertile egg. Regardless of whether the egg is fertile, we do take it away from them and replace it with a wooden egg. And the reason for this is we are not allowed to hatch the eggs. We are not allowed to actively breed more of our birds, and it's not something that we want to do anyway. The bald eagle population, they're the only endangered species of raptor in Vermont. They're doing really, really well. In fact, the wild population has recovered stupendously thanks to the efforts of Vermont Fish and Wildlife and their volunteers. So there's really no need for us to produce more bald eagles, for example, and put them out into the environment. So we don't do it. We don't allow it to happen, but we do allow them the experience of brooding an egg and chasing away angrily the volunteers that try and come in and clean their enclosure because they're on an egg and they become quite possessive of it. Yeah, awesome. Yes, Miss Ogden, she is the coolest vulture. We have another 3 vulture residents at Vins, if you're curious. Ogden is our retired education bird. We have 2 turkey vultures who are on exhibit all the time, Randolph and Pulteney. They do come off when it's below 0, but right now they're outside enjoying the sun. And our newest exhibit bird, who will also be exchanged and coming back off exhibit in the winter, is our black vulture, Los Angeles. Black vultures are not a common species here in Vermont. We tend not to see black vultures as much as we see turkey vultures. But black vultures are sort of making their way north. And that's a phenomenon that's related to migration, that as our summers get hotter and our winters get milder, birds that come back from their migration on the spring, such as black and turkey vultures, they might discover that all of the territories in Massachusetts are filled. And so they go a little bit farther north into Vermont, and they find that they can breed here. And so that's how a population extends itself northward, in part due to climate change, is every year that wave washes up, that migratory wave washes further and further up the planet, essentially. So that is us, and that is a little bit about migratory raptors in Vermont. We hope that you come to visit us at VINS. We are open, we are doing programs in the same way that we have been outdoors through the end of October. We will continue to do raptor programs in November, but we're going to be outdoors still, so dress appropriately if you come and visit us then. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you also in advance for your support. We love it when people visit, but we also rely heavily on donations. So if you think that you want to adopt either one of the birds that you met today, or if you'd like to buy a gift card at the nature store, for example, for a friend, we super duper appreciate that. Thank you so much for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your day.